I want to introduce you to Vicki. So Vicki is this woman that I met a couple years ago out doing a co-creation session with Walmart down in Bentonville. And as she started to talk about her life and her story, sort of her experience in the store and her journey to it, it just became fascinating. And this woman was just really interesting to talk to and listen with. And so we said, hey, Vicki, do you mind if we spend some more time with you? So she's from Belle Plaine, Kansas, as you'll hear in just a minute. And she said, yeah, but I don't think that what I'm doing is all that exciting. We say, no, actually your experience is really inspiring. And we think that there's something really there. So we want to capture that and spend a little bit of time to understand that experience a little bit better. So I'm going to let a short video play. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long. And you'll get to see the experience, the shopping experience, the journey of going to the store from her perspective. And keep an eye out just for some of the things that she says, some of the barriers that she faces in her life that become obstacles to that experience.
I'm Vicki. I live in Belle Plaine, Kansas, and I am 56. That hurt. My daughter Carly lives with me. She has special needs. The challenges she faces are unbelievable, and she does it with a smile on her face most times. I stick to town here pretty close for the most part. I'm on limited income. I'm on a budget. Gas is expensive and becoming more so every day. We have a little grocery store. In a pinch, it's great. I'm glad it's here, but you always want more, I guess. And I understand you're rural, it's out here, it's going to cost a little more. But good Lord, if I've got an item I buy at Walmart for $2.49, don't tell me it's going to cost me $6.59 here in town. I'm going to put the gas in my car and go to Walmart. Because of the economy, because of my budget, I coupon. I'm not extreme, but I do coupon. I do comparative shop, and I sign up for everything to see if I like them. They send you all their coupons. I get the Walmart emails all the time, too, so. It's hard to say that I have a great big plan, you know, in the real perfect world. I like to think I do because I have this book, this spiral book that I write this list in, and I try to go for the sales. I try to match up coupons with it and try to get the most bang for my buck. The train goes diagonally through this part of the state. So for me to drive to Walmart depends on how many trains I wait for. And maybe it's one train, but I have to wait for it 2 or 3 times. So by the time I drive all the way to town, I'm kind of tired, honestly. When we go to Special Olympics practices, I have to stop at a grocery store. We do our shopping on these trips to town. Like I say, economics dictates a little bit of that. So Walmart is good for that, except when you go in and the things on your list are the advertised sale ad that came out on Sunday, and it's Monday night, and you get in there and they don't have it. If you're going to advertise it, don't make people come twice to get it, you know? That's rude. Buying frozen food at Walmart this distance away is kind of dicey. If I'm going to buy anything like that, I have to put it in a cooler. I can't drive 25, 30 miles with ice cream in the car. I have a black interior. It just doesn't do. When everything on the list is found. That's a good trip, successful trip, because I don't have to make a second trip. I've got it. It's all there. No more trips back. And that's probably another, 4 gallons of gas, you know, and it starts adding up. And when you're on a fixed income, you have to watch your pennies.
Right, so that's Vicki, right? So we heard some interesting things there, right? And we saw in her life, I love the way that she describes her totally extreme couponing as not extreme couponing. And then we saw her special needs daughter, right? And she talked about some of the struggles of being on a fixed income, right? We saw the train that comes through that part of the state and how that delays her shopping trip. And then we saw her in the store. We saw her then loading her ice cream into the cooler so it didn't melt by the time it got home. And also you may have noticed, and it may have just sort of slipped by in her narrative there, that she said something really interesting about when you advertise it on a Sunday and then I come into the store on a Monday and you don't have it, that's rude. So those 2 words of "that's rude," when we showed this to the head of operations at Walmart, as well as sort of a bigger immersion that we put together for him, he said, you know, I will never look at out of stocks the same way again. Because what I didn't realize in all that is that I was being rude to my customer. And that is unacceptable for us as Walmart to do. And they had seen all the bars and charts and data on how much money they lose by not having things in stocks. But it wasn't until the idea of that's who I'm solving for. That's what I can't have as the problem in the organization, where I have to solve that sense of that they think that I'm being rude. And so when I begin to sort of see things from the customer's perspective, and I can begin to sort of solve for that, I begin to see things a lot differently, right? And there's so many organizations that do a much worse job of this, and I don't mean to point these out to be humorous, but if we look at sort of how United first described this reappointed customer, right, about dragging people off of planes. When my son was diagnosed with a peanut allergy about 5 years ago, we paid $150 for 2 EpiPens, or a package of 2 EpiPens. Now that price is up over $600, right? We have to have then 3 packages of those EpiPens, so we're spending nearly $2,000 on a prescription drug that we hope to never actually use on our child. And this is a terrible time to sprain your wrist when you have to testify in front of Congress. This is John Strumpf, who's the former CEO of Wells Fargo, who was at the helm at the time that Wells Fargo had falsified a bunch of customer accounts. The revenue that they generated from those falsified accounts was 0.02% of their revenue. So small infraction, and yet it cost him his job and did damage to the brand. Right? We've all seen the ad of Pepsi that, boy, you could sense all the right and clear intentions about coming to market with this brand positioning that brings people together and unifies people, and the execution of it probably could not be any more tone deaf in the way they brought it to market. Right? Of all the companies that collect our data and do so passively with our consent because we've checked a box at some point along the way, the ability to then of them collecting that data when they don't even necessarily need it, well, if I can't build a relationship with you, maybe I can at least sort of extract your data, which doesn't seem fair. Or falsifying research in its entirety, right? That VW, what they did with the circumventing the emissions testing, they received a $20 billion fine against that. Right? My favorite example about sort of entitled elitist millennials then going out to a remote island with Ja Rule for the Fry Festival without the appropriate food, clothing, or shelter. Just being inhuman at some point just doesn't work, right? And all that you've heard about the Fry Festival and all of these examples, it's just, this is not how you're supposed to act. And you can begin to hear this from anyone's mother, from your own mother or your mother-in-law, someone saying like, this is not how I raised you. This is not what you should be doing. But at the same time, you can see how it could so easily happen to you at your company, to these companies, right? As just examples of when the pressure to cross-sell investment products becomes too high, right? When the idea of I've got to then meet these emission standards because everyone else in my category is doing that, boy, the pressure is really on. The culture that begins to sort of manifest when I don't know anything other than results to keep my culture accountable. At the same time, we know that companies that act more human outperform the ones that don't. Right? The companies that act more human outperform the ones that don't. So we, about 4 years ago, we've always believed this. And about 4 years ago, we went out and did some research with about 20,000 consumers. We do it now annually, every year. 20,000 consumers in the US, 4,000 in the UK, to get an understanding of the brands that they think really get them. The brands that really resonate from them. And it's a very different way that we'll talk about just in a second about how this metric is sort of looked at versus the way that we typically kind of look at other satisfaction metrics. So it's about how satisfied are you with me? How likely are you to purchase from me again in the future? When I begin to reverse that and ask you some interesting questions about the brands that are most relevant to you, that get you the best, right? We see that these companies have a better revenue growth, that they have a better return on assets, that they have more recommendations and repeat purchases. These companies like Nordstrom and Google and Disney and Charles Schwab and REI, Wegmans, Chick-fil-A, Marriott, companies that are leading their own respective categories, but this, and all in different industries. And yet, this isn't a list of like, well, these are the most valuable brands, or this is sort of the one that is on the inner brand list or whatever else. These are the companies the consumers say that these are the companies that really get me. These are the companies that are acting more human. Right? And so they do it across 5 different behaviors, or 5 different sort of more human qualities. So instead of looking at how likely are you to recommend me, how satisfied are you with me, it's now that you notice me and appreciate my loyalty. So the idea of respect. Belonging, that as one of your customers, that I feel like I belong to a group of like-minded people. Right, that I belong. It's not about how satisfied I am with you. Openness, that you are authentic and mean what you say so that I trust you. That what you say, that I believe in that. Empathy, that you get me, that you understand my needs and preferences. That you might not know who I am, but that you get me in that. And that relevance, that you speak my language. You talk in terms that are meaningful to me. Right? So that these 5 characteristics from all this work that we've identified, and we've correlated then a metric to that across all industries, knowing that some industries are going to be a lot more engaging, a lot more intimate. So like beauty care. Right? Beauty care is just something that I'm going to be much more emotionally attracted to. And so it's a company that I expect to kind of get me a little bit more, as opposed to if I look at the bottom of the list about telecom. Right? Telecom is just sort of the evil that we always maybe put up and take too many pot shots at. But at the same time, I would argue that telecom probably has the biggest advantage to, if you really embrace this human direction, could you then catapult your other customers or your other competitors? And I think as you look at all these different industries, all of them have their own industry dynamics to work with, but there's an ability to improve that sense of empathy, that sense of relevance, that sense of respect that then my customer would have for me. So then it begs the question that how do we make business more human, right? So it starts by solving the business problem from the customer's perspective, right? When we look at their lives, when we look at what they're going through, and not just at ourselves and the business problems that we're trying to solve, but what are the customer problems that they are looking at, what they're faced with, and how could we do things that could better meet some of even those latent needs that they may not directly speak to. So I'm going to walk you through really quickly these 5 disciplines about how to build customers into the ways that you work. These are the things that we practice all the time just in our daily work. We want to share it with you as hopefully bits of inspiration that you can bring not just only to your work, but also I think they're somewhat universal in how you bring these to your lives. So we'll start with the idea of frame the problem. And so frame the problem is really just about looking at something from someone else's perspective. Right? And this is what jobs theory is a way to frame the problem. Even Six Sigma is a way to sort of frame the problem from the customer's point of view and then work back from that. Reverse engineering is from the customer's problem to then the business problem. You know, we'll talk about looking at the human need in equal terms to the business need, because perspective is everything. Right? That we think that consumers are sitting at home and they're thinking about our brands all the time, but that's not really the case. Right? So if I worked at Levi's, for example, I would be thinking about all day long about how do I sell more pants? There's got to be a way and a better way to sell more pants. There is no consumer that is sitting at home and saying, how do I buy more pants? There's got to be a way that I can buy more pants, right? And that disconnect, they're beginning to think about, well, how do I look better on the weekends? How do I look more professional when I'm standing in front of an audience, but still kind of cool, right? How do I make my ass look great? They're solving for their problems and not how do I just buy more of this thing that then you're trying to sell me. So perspective is everything. And how can we then reframe the commercial challenge by then considering the issue from the customer's point of view? That we're great at spotting our own problems, but not great at spotting the consumer's problem. So begin to sort of look at that in a different way. Make space. So the idea of that, the idea of space, right? That everyone can be creative. And I think a lot of people think that talent or that creativity is a talent, but really that creativity is a way of working. And it's a way of working that is enabled then by the space that we create. So we always talk about that everyone can be creative, and it's our job to then give them the space in order to do that. the safety of that space, the space where they can play and have fun, the space that they can look at things in different ways than maybe they're accustomed to. And if we don't give them that space, then we're going to get the expected answers from them. We're going to get the expected thing that I could already guess what you would say about, well, what are the 3 most important things to Laura? If you didn't even know who Laura was, you could probably run down a list of, I don't know, it's her family, it's her job, it's her faith, maybe not necessarily in that order, but you kind of would get that. Yet if I make the space around the question, and just using this terrible arbitrary example, if I said, all right, well, if I had Laura to write a letter to her daughter 20 years from now, right, what would you get that might be a little bit different? If I can make the space for her to be creative, if I can give her the tools and permission to do so, how does that begin to change everything? So giving people the tools, the permission, the environment to play and then to problem solve. So then about building relationships. So the space that we create is only as good as the relationships that we have in that, right? So that if I want people to be creative, I've got to begin to break down the barriers that keep them from breaking through. I've got to open up the person before I open up the topic, or I'm just going to get, here are the 3 things that are most important to me. And building that relationship is really sort of a key piece in order to get people to talk about things that when you're designing for the unexpected. So we talk about that relationships are the source of results. You don't get really all that much good stuff working on your own. You get the good stuff in the connections between people. When I can begin to sort of break down some of those barriers and I put a physicist next to a consumer, when I can just sort of mix it up and create environments and spaces and relationships that otherwise wouldn't have existed. So going beyond the transactional to get at the magic ingredient that changes everything, right? The connections between people. Right, so look for possibility, and looking for possibility is all about that idea about designing for the unexpected, right? The breakthroughs come from unreasonable requests. If I just ask you sort of boring, lame questions, I'm going to get the boring, lame responses. But if I put some kind of a constraint on that, some kind of ridiculous thing that, well, if NASA were to take over your company, how would they face this same challenge? What would they do differently? What if the mafia took over your company? How would they do that differently? To begin to sort of frame that challenge, to do that differently, and create some constraint in doing so. All right. Oh, I didn't know we were doing time for questions. So let's jump to questions.
Well, actually, first, a big round of applause for Bill.
Thank you.